The other day I was kind of trying to think about a list of things in the John Benet Ramsey case that maybe I didn't know about, or maybe I hadn't seen much about, or what have you, and just kind of discuss. Maybe you know about them more than I do. Kind of discuss them, and so I try to create a list, or just things that we've seen before, and just kind of work through a list of some of those trace evidence things or some forensic type things that were mentioned as found in the home, and kind of lay those out, but at a later time, kind of dive deeper into them. Maybe we might find something. Who knows? So I kind of did a little write up, and I was obviously some of this was discussed in the Wolf versus Ramsey case in 2003, and I pulled from some of this from the Wolf versus Ramsey case because some of the because at first I wasn't going to use it, and at first when I first got it or downloaded it, and I was kind of scrolling through it and looking through it, I didn't really want to use it for anything because I didn't think um, it contained any like sort of first person accounts, I guess, if from John or Patsy or so. I didn't think it would be useful, and obviously it's not unuseful, um, but just useful in the sense of coming directly from Patsy and John until I just kind of saw some of the information about statement of material facts and stuff like that and being able to confirm that. So in this case, looking at some of the trace evidence and some things that surprised me, let me know in the comments. Maybe some things that you know about and weren't as surprised and what you know about them. But kind of going through this case, where they were walking through it, um, there was a lot of physical evidence that was introduced or discussed with respect to John Benet Ramsey. And I think some of the relevant points that the court summarized were, I think the first thing was the beaver hair on the duct tape. I didn't know that existed. That's still something that I want to double check and kind of keep diving into. But in that case, I think it mentioned something to the effect of beaver hair on the duct tape. And I think they said it was on the inside. So when John Benet's body was found, the black duct tape that covered her mouth, animal hair, alleged to be beaver, was embedded on the tape's adhesive. And so the court noted that nothing in the Ramseys' home contained beaver fur, indicating that the tape likely came from outside the house or had been taken outside at some point. And I have been researching this, off and on for the past 3 weeks. You know, I want so much, I want so badly to dive into this right now, but I have to hold myself from diving into this for a later date because I did a whole nother write up on this, and I can't find where those write ups are. I put them in a folder and I can't find them, but I'll find them. I think they're on my other laptop. But anyways, I found this just I found this interesting because I don't want to be I don't want to drag this out longer than it needs to. I just want to go through these and have a nice clean break. So I found this quite interesting. Um, Beaver hair, and I started looking up some things about beaver hair and what where would beaver hair come from? What would you get it on? You know what I mean? Like what? To be honest, I've never heard of anybody, or I don't know personally of anybody who wears beaver hair in any form or fashion. For me, it's always been um, alligator skin, snake skin, some type of reptile, right? If anything, I know there are people who probably wear beaver, and sort of like other animals that aren't sort of mainstream in my mind. I don't call it main. I don't consider beaver hair mainstream. I don't consider it something that's out there a lot. You have a lot of obviously the mainstream things you are cheetah print, leopard print, zebra. Those are the big things that you'll probably hear about, especially when it comes to minks and furs and all such as that. all such as that. But I never really heard of beaver fur, and I was like, beaver fur, and it's possible that this could be a link to something, uh, depending on what beaver fur is used for, especially in the United States. Because again, when we think about stuff like beaver fur being found in the crime scene, we have to figure out, first of all, like we did with John's black wool sweater that he wore for Christmas, where is it sourced from? I think that's the big thing. Sorry. Where is it sourced from? Um, and depending on where it's sourced from, what where can you get it in the United States? And what is it doing at this crime scene? Who would have brought it to this crime scene? Right? I think those are the big things, the big questions that we need to ask. Where did it come from? How did it get to the crime scene? Who had it? And I think when we think about immediately, and I know some people, sometimes when I look at the comments on TikTok and every now and again, sometimes people try to withstand me on certain facts because they try to wave a magic wand over, they try to do a bunch of hand waving over some facts of the case. And it's like, no, I mean, you got to ask questions like this. For example, when we look at John, and I'm sorry, I'll move on, but when we look at John and we think about the fact that John was wearing a black Israeli wool sweater that the night of the crime, and black fibers similar, very similar to a black wool, not just, and I'm not just talking about any black wool sweater. I'm talking about fibers directly like similar to Israeli wool that you were wearing. And we're supposed to just forget about the just coincidence. You got to stop. You must be stopped. When you say that that's just a coincidence, stuff like that is just a coincidence, without thinking more critically about everything that happens, the fingerprints on the pineapple bowl, the fingerprints on the spoon, the fingerprints on the glass, the fingerprints on JonBenét's clothes, we have to. You don't want the Ramseys to be guilty at that point. And I'm not saying we should force the Ramseys to be guilty. Absolutely not. We should continue to evaluate the evidence to see which direction it leads, of course, obviously. But when you have these things that are going this direction and you just do a bunch of hand waving, I can't even really talk to you because you're not willing to discuss the case at a critical level. Because how is it that all of these things belonging to the Ramseys line up so much, and then we have some suspicious things like beaver hair? Beaver hair. From my research, beaver hair doesn't just come by every single day. Beaver hair is not a run-of-the-mill thing, at least where I'm from, in the circles that I run in. And I'm not saying that it is not, that it's just, never found anywhere. Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is when we see like very unique things on a normal basis, on an average basis, on a daily basis, how many times do you hear beaver hair thrown around? On an average basis, how many times do you see people wearing beaver hair related things? On an average basis, how many times do you see beaver hair related stuff in somebody's home? You're not going to see it a lot. You might see a deer, you might see an elk, you might see an antelope. I mean, you might see a bear. I'm talking about the taxidermy. You might see that stuff in somebody's house, yeah. But a beaver? How often? And be honest, not a lot. Even if you see it, you don't really see a lot of people other than yourself that know about it. And so when this stuff shows up at a crime scene, it's weird because it's like, that's something so unique that would be extremely unique to a crime scene. Like, wow, that's crazy. How would beaver hair, who would be, out of all the places to find beaver hair, something that's so unique, you would find it at the Ramsey's home? There's so many very unique things that enter into the Ramsey's home. John's sweater, right? High-tech boots, so many milk and pineapples, so many weird and unique things that enter into their space that you're just like, who if we're going with the intruder theory on this JonBenét Ramsey case, what kind of intruder was this? Nobody, like, that's interesting. What kind of intruder? Because now we're no longer talking about the reason why I say this, because now we're no longer talking about somebody who just enters to commit a crime. We're talking about and brings the bare minimum essentials that they need to solve the crime. We're talking about somebody who just decided to deck themselves out in lavish array. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about somebody who decided that, hey, I'm going to wear something that sheds a lot. Because if you think about the wool that was found that was similar to John, and John denies it, it's not me, absolutely not. Don't even ask me again. Okay, well, then that means that the intruder wore it. So the intruder apparently wore a black Israeli-based wool sweater to the kidnapping. And then, secondly, the kidnapper somehow, some way decided to wear something related to beaver hair. What's the problem with that? Because they shed. They shed. Why would a criminal who does not want to be caught walk into a house wearing a bunch of garments or carrying a bunch of garments that shed all over the place? Come on. You guys barely have any human DNA. You can't even get a solid DNA print off this person. You're grasping at straws with the unidentified male DNA. That's literally all you have. You have nothing else. Think about that for a moment. They have nothing else on the intruder except unidentified male DNA. That's it. They have no other reason to believe that this was an outside person. Maybe I'm forgetting something, but they have no other reason to believe that this was anybody else outside, and some sort of outside intruder, whether they were a close family member or a close friend or somebody that knew them and watched them for a long time. Who cares? We're saying that this person, other than the unknown male DNA, what do we have? Go ahead, I'll wait. Remind me, please. I don't remember it. And this is why I say behaviorally, it starts to get a little bit sticky. Because when we think about beaver hair, who else just has beaver hair floating around their house? And who just decides to bring a bunch of things that would, this is the contradiction. This person's trying to get in and get out, and they're staging the crime scene only to leave beaver hair back at the crime scene, only to leave black wool Israeli fibers back at the crime scene. Were they trying to be caught? Because if they were trying to be caught and this is everything that they did and you still can't catch them, you're incompetent. You really are. You're incompetent. Because this person is saying, catch me, please. I want you to find me. Let's go on to the second thing. Unmatched animal hairs on JonBenét's hands. Dark animal hairs were found on both JonBenét's hands. These hairs could not be matched to any item in the Ramsey's home. The combination of the beaver hair on the tape and dark hairs on her hands suggested that whoever bound and gagged carried items bearing animal fur into the house and wore such items while handling her. So now we have dark animal hairs on her hands. How did dark animal hairs get on her hands? This is why I need the transcripts, the transcripts, the interviews from Fleet and Priscilla. That's why we need them, because that'll tell us a lot about maybe where some of this stuff came from. Dark animal hairs. So we got the beaver hair. Now we have dark animal hairs that were on both of her hands. That means that somehow, some way, JonBenét grabbed. She wrapped her hands around something. Whether it was late at night when she woke up and she encountered the intruder, or whether she was being upstairs and somebody who was taking her upstairs had something, dark animal hairs, on her hands. On her hands. And that's what I'm saying. After everything that has gone on, she had dark, as far as I could tell from what this report says, she had dark animal hairs found on both of her hands. Meaning that we're talking about it by the time we found her at from 12:30, right? By the time we found her from 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, all the way to noontime, right? By the time we found her, all the way until noontime, 1 p.m. in the afternoon, 1:05, I think they said, she kept well, she didn't keep anything. Rest in peace. Her hands were clear to hold these furs, these animal furs. Somebody is walking around this, and that's what I'm saying. I want you to imagine with me. Somebody is walking around this house with animal fur on their hands. Who is doing that? Who is walking around this house with animal fur on their hands? I'm confused. Who would be doing that? A criminal, is what we're led to believe, would be walking around, because it's a different type of dark animal. As far as I can tell, it's a different type of animal fur. By the way, if you've given in the last month, I want to send a special shout out to you. Thank you so much for giving. Before I forget, special shout out to you. I appreciate you so much. You know what? I need to get the names. Got to do it right. Okay, so I have here Anders Gustafsson, 1598. I appreciate you for giving. Much love to you. Shout out to you. I have another one. I have is I Can Only Imagine, 57. Thank you so much for your love and support. I also have, I remember it the other day. I just happened to see it. Cotton Star gave, I think, on the live or something like that. But appreciate you, bro. Much love to you. Keep doing your thing. Big hug to everybody. Hope you're doing well out there. But anyways, before I lose my train of thought, thank you so much. I just think that it's quite funny. My main point, my main idea was that I think it's quite interesting that these are very special items that this criminal is bringing into the crime scene. And for what purpose, right? Everything that is brought into the crime scene has a purpose. Because I think when we talk about hand waving, the more you look into this case, the more you realize we do entirely too much hand waving on certain things, and we don't analyze everything that comes into that crime scene has a purpose. And we say, oh, the criminal they knew what they were going to do, whatever, and they wanted to stage the crime scene. Yeah, but they didn't bring anything. So we are trusting, and we really believe that this criminal really trusted the Ramsey's house to have everything they needed to stage a crime. Just for a second, think a little bit longer with me, okay? Just think a little bit. We really believe that the criminal decided, forget it. I'm not going to take anything into this crime scene, nothing that I'm going to leave there, because the criminal didn't leave anything other than a little bit of rope and some tape. Everything else that was staged came from the Ramsey's home, except from what we know, except for this. Yeah. But everything else came from the Ramsey's house. They just walked in the house and said, I'll take half of my stuff and I'll take half of your stuff and I'll just see what happens. We'll see what we come up with. And that's how they decided to stage the crime scene? Come on, man. What kind of game do you think this is? This person watched you in your home for a long, watch you. That's what John said. Man, that's all right. I was looking at this earlier today. Let me see if I can pull it up. Because I feel like, and I want to make sure I read the comment correctly. So I was kind of going over, yeah, I think it was Jennifer Underwood's comment. And she was just kind of, and I think I liked it or something like that. Um, but essentially, she was asking whether or not John or Patsy, ever suggested the possibility of, somebody sort of watching their house or waiting for the right time to pounce. And I think John actually did suggest that. Said in his memoir, In Death of Innocence, John Ramsey explores sort of this realization that his daughter's killer had likely been monitoring their home, noting that the perpetrator could have easily watched their house for hours from a parked car without drawing any attention in their crowded neighborhood. Now, crowded neighborhood, I have never seen any verification that the neighborhood was just crowded, but that was because it was on Christmas Day. But even still, when I look through pictures on Google Maps of different time periods, never do I get the sense that this neighborhood is crowded, right? Never do I get the sense that there's just a bunch of people just flooding this neighborhood. You know what I mean? So it's to the point to where it wouldn't, and it makes me like sort of like not believe you when you say, oh, the neighborhood was crowded. What? Like, I feel like you're trying to make me believe your story. And it's just like, we don't even know if the neighborhood was crowded. I know that's such a like minute detail to be focused on. I know that's such a stop. I know that's I've got to call in 10 minutes. I know that's such a minute detail to be focused on. But for me, it's just like crowded neighborhood. It's just because I looked and I don't see that neighborhood as being super crowded. I see cars in the road, but for you to act like there's just so many cars that are just overrunning your neighborhood that you can't tell up from down. You know what I mean? It's just like, I feel like when I looked at that neighborhood, just, on Google Maps, I was like, oh, that could be Susie's car. That could be, John's car or whatever. That could be Matt's car, whatever. His car just sitting on the side of the road, probably for the neighbor. But I feel like if you're going by, you can't really just park anywhere, right? You can't just have somebody pull up and park in front of somebody's house and just sit there. You know what I mean? I don't think there's enough houses or enough, cars parked on the side of the road for somebody to just, there wasn't enough cars parked on the road from what I saw for somebody to just pull up and park without being noticed. Outside of someone's home, you just pull up and park and just sit there. I didn't see that. So for you to try to convince me that, oh yeah, there's people here all the time. I mean, maybe at different points in time, maybe around Halloween, but on a normal basis, where somebody's just able to pull up and just sit and not be recognized? I mean, unless they have tinted windows, I feel like you would have noticed that. But I mean, like, even at that, I feel like you would have noticed somebody, pull up and park in front of somebody's house and just sit there. You know what I mean? I don't think there's enough houses or enough, cars parked on the side of the road for somebody to just, there wasn't enough houses or enough, cars parked on the side of the road for somebody to just pull up and park in front of somebody's house and just sit there. I didn't see that. So for you to try to convince me that, oh yeah, there's people here all the time. I mean, maybe at different points in time, maybe around Halloween, but on a normal basis, where somebody's just able to pull up and just sit and not be recognized? I mean, unless they have tinted windows, I feel like you would have noticed that. But I mean, like, even at that, I feel like you would have noticed somebody pull up and sit in their car and be watching your house. There's only a couple places where they can watch your house, and not only watch your house, but they're not just watching to they're not just watching to just watch. They're watching, according to what you're telling us, they're watching to get in. So they would have to get up in advance and make a move toward the house. They would have to see someone somewhere. They would have to come back multiple times to see and watch. And at that point in time, I feel like you would recognize that, hey, there's a blue car and there's somebody. Look, there's somebody sitting in the blue car, or maybe they're sitting in the foreign faction, big white creepy van. You know what I mean? Like that. Those things are noticeable. I'm not saying that they have to be the case. Don't get me wrong there, but I'm just saying, like, I feel like you would see somebody and notice them at some point in time, as many times as the person would have to come back in order to properly scope. There's no way that a person can sit in a car for hours on end with the windows up. Maybe they have the windows cracked, but there's no way that a person can sit in the car with that, and they would have to have the car off so you can't hear the engine running for hours on end, and you wouldn't notice them ever. Somebody would walk around and be like, yeah, man, I used to see this guy pull up in front of my house all the time, because they have to pull up in front of somebody's house. And when there's not a lot of cars in front of your house, trust me, I know. My aunt lives in a place like that, to where there's cars on the road. There's cars on the street, right? Because you only have, the driveways are in the back alley, similar to how John's was, John and Patsy. The driveways are in the back alley. That's how it is in Dallas. But when everybody else parks up front, if you're a friend of the family or you're a guest or something like that, or you're staying there temporarily, you park up front by the mailbox. But those spaces are guarded, right? In a way, like, it's kind of like an unspoken rule that you don't park in front of somebody else's house in that neighborhood. So guess what? When I stay there, my aunt, whoever, they come and if it's a car that we don't recognize, we look out inside and we say, oh, whose car is that? Because we know, oh, that belongs to the next door neighbor. Oh, must be somebody for the next door neighbor. And you can look out and see somebody in the car. So I don't buy the fact that it's hard for me to believe the fact that John is saying, this neighborhood is so overrun with people that we couldn't know who was watching us at all times. So anyways, John goes on to say, they could have parked their car for long hours without drawing any attention in this crowded neighborhood. And so they go on in the death of innocence. From what I can tell, John reasons that the perpetrators somehow knew the family would be gone for a number of hours during the late afternoon and evening of Christmas Day. Concluding his thoughts in the death of innocence, John theorizes that the intruder entered the house through one of his many doors or windows, during their absence, and cleverly waited in hiding until the family returned and went to sleep, using that uninterrupted time to write the elaborate ransom note. And it's just like, well, hold on. Now the person knows when you're going to be leaving the house? How? That means they had to interact with you somehow, some way. They had to interact with you, or they had to interact with Fleet White. You've seen them. You know them. There's no way that somebody can get the drop on you like that without them talking to you or talking to somebody that you know directly. And nobody that no secretary said, hey, last week, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, somebody that I've never seen and I haven't seen since came up to me and asked me, hey, do you know what John Ramsey is doing? Because it has to be around the time that the Christmas party is happening, and it has to be somebody who's privy to the Christmas party happening. Remember, the Christmas party for Fleet White was small. It was a small gathering. It was friends and family. Remember that. It was a friends and family gathering. Not a lot of people went. Susan Stein, who became more of a friend to the Ramseys, they didn't even go. After the fact, they didn't go. They weren't there. It was just friends and family and the Ramseys. That's what it was. And I think maybe some other people, but I think it was just friends and family and the Ramseys. And maybe Roxy Walker and her husband. But that's it. Like, There wasn't a lot of people just over there hanging out. Not like, from what I understand, not like on the 23rd when John Ramsey and Patsy hosted a party at their house. It's not the same thing. And so somebody had to know about that party. We run out of leads because it's like, okay, Linda Hoffman knew. Who did she tell? It would have had to be Linda Hoffman and somebody who had access to be able to give someone access, to be able to give somebody the ability to say, walk over to their house and watch and go here, go directly here. Because when you analyze a crime scene, it's always about, when somebody knew what they were doing, when they went directly to the door. Somebody had to go directly to that door and nothing else. They knew what they were doing. They knew where they were going. They were in here after something because somebody gave them the tip off. And so during a 2000 television interview with Paula Woodward, John Ramsey elaborates on this specific timeline, suggesting that the intruder was likely watching the house that day, waited for the family to leave for their Christmas dinner at the White's residence, and then slipped inside. In that same 2000 interview, John explains that this window of opportunity would have given the killer several uninterrupted hours to familiarize himself with the layout of the large home, figure out where the bedrooms were located, and prepare for the attack. In 2019, in a 2019 daytime exclusive interview on the Dr. Oz show, John Ramsey candidly addresses the vulnerabilities of his home's security, sharing his deep regret over becoming complacent because he believed Boulder was a safe community. It had nothing to do with Boulder. During that same Dr. Oz interview, John admits that while he thought he had locked the doors, he had not checked the windows before going to bed. They didn't break through a window. That's what I'm saying. He was trying to say that they had come through JonBenét's window upstairs. He was trying to insinuate that. They didn't come through that window. They just went down to the basement. They knew what they were doing. They didn't come through some random door and just check windows. They went down to where there was a grate on top. They had to pull the grate up and then go down through there. So they knew what they were doing. Anyways, before going to bed, he acknowledged that he skipped all that. And ultimately, the police ultimately found a door open the next morning. No, they didn't. Later in that same Dr. Oz broadcast, John firmly rejects the idea of any random intruder, insisting instead that the perpetrator was someone who had deliberately watched them and knew their patterns and knew they were going to be out that evening. On the Crime Junkie podcast with Ashley Flowers, John Ramsey further solidifies his belief that the killer had breached their sanctuary while they were out for dinner. In his conversation with her, John recounts that they naively thought they lived in a safe community and thus did not diligently check the door locks before heading to bed. Continuing his account on the Crime Junkie podcast, John shares his chilling conclusion that the bad guy was already inside the house when the family returned home, silently waiting to go to sleep before utilizing the stun gun to silence JonBenet and take her down. So we're going to continue to go through this. We're going to continue to go through this. Thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe. And I'm going to keep analyzing this. I got several more to go. But take care of yourself. Make sure you're doing well. And I got to go get on my call now. But until next time, take it easy.